still do this sometimes, how I build a deck. I find like I'll see a synergy between two cards and then I'll see how to make it work. And then I'll build a deck entirely around that. That was more, I will say that was more a 60 card kitchen table.
Oh yeah.
I don't build commander decks like that.
Well, that's what I was going to comment on too, because like that's also very much like a mindset I have when I build a lot of these modern and pioneer decks that I have, is you can do a 60 card glass cannon pretty easily, but with like commander decks,
yeah,
you kind of need to fluff it a bit more than just like, oh, I'm going to run this one card and then a few cards that support it. It doesn't work well. I've done it. It does not work well. Unless you're like tutoring for like a CEDH level deck where it's like, I'm going to play ad nauseum and I'm going to do this.
If you're building a combo in a commander deck, it can't rely on only a couple of cards. You have to have a lot of support around it. And I shouldn't say combo, though that's true for combos, but if there's some type of synergy you're trying to work around, you need to make sure that you have support for that synergy to make a commander deck. Because this is actually how I do my commander decks. I build them around themes. Like a good example would be my Nine Fingers Keen deck that I played last week. It's basically a Gates / Ward deck where every card revolves around Gates or Ward, and sometimes both in some cases. And that's the whole thing of the deck. And it works pretty well. Like, it's not a fantastic deck. It's not CEDH by any stretch, but I enjoy playing it. So that's an interesting thing about that deck.
A lot of the decks that I have, like, again, like I built these things not to be the best decks there are. I like to experiment a lot. So it'll be like, oh, hey, here's something I haven't really done a lot in a deck. Maybe it's madness, right? Or it's the whole idea of turning life gain into life loss, right? I'll have a theme, an idea, and then that's what I run with. So I was testing out some decks the other day, and it's that whole glass cannon aspect where it's like, okay, well, I know if I get rid of this one card, it shuts down the entire synergy, right? It's like, if you have any sort of interaction to where you can pinpoint and target at the right time, the deck's dead.
That's something that I actually like more about 60 card than commander. And that's one of the strengths of 60 card, obviously, is there's more consistency. And if somebody does, pop one bit of your combo pieces, you have other pieces within the deck that you can rely on, or another copy of that card that you potentially could get out. Where with commander, you have to have contingency plans, set up with other cards because of the singleton setup. That's one of the things that I just actually prefer about commander, or about 60 card. I love commander, but for different reasons.
Right. Well, I guess that gets into a lot of the other aspects too, of like when you're building a deck, what are you aiming for, right? So like what type of deck? So I mean, of course, format's the first question, right? And you can have fun in either one. It's just commander tends to be what people play the most. It's the more social game, right? You set a table with other people, not just 1v1, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna kill you before you kill me.
Yeah.
No pleasantries.
Exactly.
But when it comes to like EDH, it's like, okay, well, am I trying to build something super competitive? Or am I trying to build something more casual?
Yeah.
And more in the middle, maybe, right? And it's really, you have to ask that question. Everything's a 7, but what kind of 7?
Yeah.
Even with that, it makes me think of post this on Reddit last week, and I mentioned this to you privately, but like someone's game store implemented a rule for casual where your deck could either have infinite combos or tutors, not both. So it kind of really rains down that I'm going to tutor for my infinite combo piece and win, right? You can tutor for other things as long as it's not infinite. It could be game changing, or you could be sitting there making a million squirrels, but you had to draw the right cards.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like what I was talking about before we started recording. I have my sliver deck, and my sliver deck has a gross combo in it, and I wouldn't necessarily call it infinite, but it's bad. Like, it's not great for opponents, and it's essentially the Morophon and Joda, the Archmage, or whatever Joda's first card was. I can't remember exactly. And it's basically, Morophon makes it that of the creature type you select, you can pay white, blue, black, red, green less instead of of its mana cost. So basically making everything cheaper. And then Joda says, instead of casting a spell for its mana cost, cast it for white, blue, black, red, green. So with 2 of them on the board, you make everything free. And That's kind of gross. And if I could tutor for that, that would be gross, because Morophon's my commander. So I would just have to tutor for one card. And then all of a sudden everything's free. Yeah, it can be taken apart pretty easily. But yeah, I think that's an interesting rule. I think that's fair, if everybody agrees to it, it's a classic thing as long as everybody's cool with it.
It's interesting because, like, personally, I do find myself running less tutors than I really should be. And like a lot less often because I do appreciate the randomness of how the game can go. And I'd rather have something in that spot that makes a game impact rather than postponing for a specific solution. But I also hate shuffling.
Yeah. I rarely use tutors except in 60 card decks where I know what I need and I know the mechs of it, that it's interesting. One of the things that I don't like about playing Magic is the thinking about the game outside of what's directly in front of you. I'm not great at that. It's always funny to me when I'm playing, especially when I'm playing in an event or something. And obviously the person across from me is a much more competitive player. And I'll play a card like Thoughtseize or something like that, where they have to reveal their hand to me and I get to pick. And I won't write the cards down. Like I won't write the list of cards that's in their hand down because that's what they would do. They would see my hand and they'd make quick notes like, okay, he has a this, he has a this, he has a this. I don't do that because I don't want to. Yes, I know it might lose me the game, but I don't. It's too much of a mental load for me. I would rather, what I find fun is playing with what's in front of me. And tutors actually create a little bit of that sort of thinking because when you're tutoring for something, you have to think, okay, like you have to look at, yes, what's in front of me, but then you also have to think, what's in my deck? What do I need? What is the best choice at this time? Should I, do I need to get this combo piece or that combo piece? Where when it's in a 60 card deck, it's much easier because in a 60 card deck, the combos and the mechanics and the synergies are much more concise, I think, than in Commander, because Commander, there's so many more possibilities. That's why in Commander, I rarely use tutors. And I only use tutors in 60 card when I'm trying to build a combo.
I'm not quite the same a bit, though. But I mean, like, I can't be, and this is a personal thing, right? I get it. Like, there's the whole competitive mindset, like you talked about, where there's people that is the goal, that is the game. Like, not their definition of fun is stomping people as hard as they can. And that's whatever floats your boat, right? Yeah, to the same point, I never jot that down. I never bother because, like, to be honest, like, you'll play it when you play it and I'll react when I react, right?
Yeah.
I think back to games I used to play where, like, people would try to pay attention to, like, where certain cards were in your hand too. To say, okay, well, like, if I have to, like, randomly choose a card in your hand for you to discard, I'm going to pick over here because I know the ones over there are your lands based on the way you hold your hand.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And real quick, I want to jump in here. I know we're not espousing saying that you shouldn't write down the cards when you see them. You shouldn't. That is actually a good thing. If you want to win games, do that. Like, do it. It's actually a smart thing to do. I don't, because I know that it's not really worth my time when I'm presented with that scenario. It's like, to me, it's just not worth it. To you, it might be worth it. Yeah, listen, dear listener. So don't do this just because we don't. I'm just wanting to throw that out there. It is good practice.
The really big thing there is it depends on the style of deck you're playing and the type of game you're playing, right? If you're running Thoughtseize, you're probably playing competitively.
Yeah.
Like you need to be paying attention and that's to the level where I don't run that level of control. I just don't. I don't like it. That's me, right? I like being a bit more easygoing, have fun, do weird crap. But to the same point, like these kinds of people also go in an event knowing what kinds of decks people are building, and they memorize those deck lists. The other thing we have to think about here, and there's so many different schools of thought on this, but when you talk about the meta, when you're talking about draft, right? There's a whole, what's the meta for what's going on here, and like what's the packs, what's missing from the packs, what type of creatures and removal should I be grabbing based on? Is this an enchantment heavy set? Is this artifact heavy, right? And it changes everything. It does.
Oh yeah, it does. Just thinking about, and I'll use the example of Lost Caverns of Ixalan to Murders at Karlov Manor. The difference between the two, or even going back to Wilds of Eldraine, the difference between the deck building of those three sets is astronomical. Now there are obviously basic norms that you use when drafting, and those norms are there's a through line there. That's still going to exist, but in Wilds of Eldraine, there was a bigger focus on enchantment removal. And back also in Wilds of Eldraine, you had a lot of creatures that had a 1 power. So cards that did only 1 point of damage actually were higher value in Wilds of Eldraine than they would have been in other formats. Because like Flick a Coin is a good example. Flick a Coin was being rated fairly middle of the road, even kind of low in terms of when you should pick it. And it actually climbed up. It didn't become like a pack one, pick one, obviously, but it did climb up the ranks because there were a lot of cards out there. The Gingerbread Man, the Gingerbread card, the one that the haste that comes out, that's a 1/1. You can pop that with Flick a Coin, and like that Gingerbread Man can do a lot of damage if it goes unchecked. Whereas in other formats, vastly different. And I think that's one of the things I love about Magic is that when you say deck building, which if you haven't figured it out, that's what the topic is today. The deck building is vastly different between draft, 60 card formats, and Commander.
What tools do you prefer to use when you are like brainstorming and building your decks? Because like I've gone through different websites and I'm kind of converting to Architect myself.
I haven't tried Architect yet. I use Moxfield for the most part. That being said, I could be sold on another thing. In fact, sell me on Architect. What do you like about Architect more than Moxfield?
Well, so Architect is the 4th website I've used. So I started with MTG Vault back in the day. Because there wasn't a lot of deck sites back in the day, and it was interesting because like there's forums here and there, and you can go see people's decks and all this whatnot. Very bare bones. Then I went to MTG Goldfish because that's where a lot of the stuff I was looking up was being linked to. It's like, okay, cool. I like the format where you can see the mana values next to it. They're grouped nicely and all that, and it was easy to order cards off of there. Not easy to build your deck though.
Yeah.
And there's a weird bug with Goldfish to where if your cursor is over the left ad box, when you type in your search box, it actually goes in backwards. So
oh geez, that's weird.
It happens to be a lot. So then like I went to Moxfield because I was like, okay, well, kind of similar, a lot of the same feel, but Moxfield had the tokens at the bottom. It had a lot of the other same features I wanted. You could change the view. You could change the filters. It's a default, kind of dark mode for what I use.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty good. And I love the fact that like there's QR codes if you want to print them and, bring it with your deck. And someone's like, oh, hey, well, cool. What deck is it? Like, scan it. Right. Never done it yet. I've thought about it. But then it's like, okay, well, there's Architect, right? And there's a lot of people were talking about using it, and it's kind of the newer tool out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave it a little bit of a try. There's a couple features with it that I do like. A few of them that I'm still growing on, but overall, you can get it to the same look and feel as Moxfield. It also shows you tokens, right? Which is a big thing for me. And then you can still order cards from there, but it has a few extra things too, where when you're talking about how you're looking at your deck, you can do stacks, you can do grids, you can do whatever you want. I prefer grid typically, but I've done the brewing before too, where you select a group and then it goes across and you can just like see the cards in that category. Like if you're looking for your ramp, okay, well, show me my ramp, and then I'm going to go through and it's like, okay, I need to get rid of 2 of these. Like, which ones do I want to do? You can drag and drop things into different categories if you want, or you can click on them and edit the details.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty nice too. And then also the fact is you can tag cards if you have it, don't have it, or you're getting it, and you can filter on that. Yeah,
I was just about to ask about that because Moxfield has a wish list feature that I'm not thrilled with, and I'd be interested to know how Architects matches up, because that's the one feature that I've never liked on Moxfield, because I don't know, the way they implement it doesn't work for the way my brain works. It just does it in a way that isn't intuitive to me, and it makes it difficult. And I'd be interested to know how Architect handles it and if it's any better.
I'm not sure about a cross deck. I've not messed with that before, because I've only done one deck at a time, and that's how I run it. The good part though is when you're doing your deck on Architect, like I'll set mine to, like right now, like one of mine's group by color tag. So then I have like mechanic commander, then there'd be like don't have, getting, and have. It's much easier to manage the list of cards there. But then when you go to buy cards, you can set a filter that just says by color tag and like show me don't have. And then it's like, okay, now I go to the website and it's only the list that I've tagged that I need.
Interesting. Okay. But yeah, I'm going to check out Architect and see, because that's the other thing. Like it's one thing to think about building a deck, but then actually building it. Like I'm interested to know, how do you functionally build the deck? Do you do it online and then gather the cards, or do you?
I do.
Okay.
So it's a mix sometimes. So where like I have a little container, and Walmart in the office section sells these little clip containers, like it literally looks like it's about the size of a card and it has a little lid on it. And they're perfect for cards you just want to set aside for specific things, right? So I have one of like proxies. I have one of like tokens that I need to put in a binder. And then like a couple others are cards I was like, hey, I don't want to lose you. I need you to be somewhere I can find you.
Yeah.
But there's a few cards I have pulled out that I was like, when I was looking at them, I'm like, okay, I want to build a deck around you. Let's pull things that are similar, and I'll keep you in mind, right? And I'll do that too. Like I do it both ways, where like I want to build a Selesnya token spam deck, but I have a lot of the cards for it. But then I was like, okay, well, we're gonna use these for other decks now, right? But then like Rules Stomophage, or there was some other one from Wilds of Eldraine that I wanted to build a deck around, and I still plan on it, but like I have the cards, like some of them, so like I have, Drown in the Lock set aside and all that, because like I know I'll need them when I get around to it, and then I'll go into the website and I'll start the deck, and I'll typically look at other similar decks people have built to get an idea of what kind of cards I don't know about that people thought were good. It's like we always, ring through our own card catalog in our head, right? And it's like, okay, I need Sign in Blood, I need, all these other cards that are just staples, right?
Yeah.
And that's like half the deck is a staple anyways. But
yeah,
I love playing weird things too, right? So some of the time it's like, okay, well, what else could I pull? Like there's a deck I was playing the other day that there's a few cards in there that I think are duds. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, what could I put in this slot that fits the criteria of like the color base I'm using? In this case, no colors. It was a colorless deck. But like artifacts that I want to duplicate, or I'd love to have multiple copies and spam the battlefield with. Like, what are those, right? I haven't answered it myself yet, but like being able to go online and say, okay, well, these are the ones I'm going to tag as my maybe board. Like I'm going to get rid of them. And then what's a good replacement? And I can toss those on my sideboard or whatever. Or in a lot of cases, like I'll dump everything into the main deck if I'm building a commander deck, and start going through tagging things and filtering and saying, okay, well, I have like 250 cards in here. Well, we have to cut a lot, right? So it's like, okay, well, filter by mana value and start looking at, okay, well, of all my 4 drops, which ones are the weak ones, right? Like what's the easy cut when doing this comparison? And that's kind of how I start going through the cycles to where I say, okay, well, what am I trying to do? And I tend to build very high synergy decks, not aggressive decks all the time, but like I do things that love to bounce off of each other, right? And it's like, okay, well, this one can trigger a lot of these other effects that I put in the deck. So, for example, the Mothman deck I'm building, like the whole point is to get a lot of radiation counters out there, right? I want to, show the world what Fallout's like.
yeah.
But like, how do you do that even better? Proliferate.
Yeah.
And you spam the crap out of it.
Yep.
And then you got a lot of cards in there that have +1/+1 counters on them. It's like, oh, hey, guess what? Bonus target, right? Or cards that as soon as you mill a card, hey, guess what? I'm making a token.
Yep.
Or cards that double the amount of cards they mill.
Yeah.
Like I latch onto like a mechanic and how it interacts, and then I find things that stem and attach to it. And a lot of this, again, comes in the style of how I build my 60 card format decks. So like I have a deck I was thinking about. I named it Cranky. You haven't seen this one yet, but it's a Mind Crank deck. Right?
Oh, nice.
So for those unfamiliar, all right, so Mind Crank is a 2 colorless mana drop. or any color, I should say, artifact, and it says when an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of their library into his or her graveyard. It's only ever been printed a few times. Honestly, it could be using a reprint. So you have that in the deck. The idea is you ping the opponent, they mill. Well, there's also a card out there called Dusk Mantle Guild Mage, right? And this is a 2-card combo. And with that, so it's a blue and a black to play, 2/2. And it has 2 different activated abilities. The first one, you pay 1, a blue and a black. And it says, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 1 life. So guess what? You get this on the battlefield, and you just have to do 1 point of damage, and it's infinite. They die. That's it. That's the whole deck. That's the whole point of that deck, right? But the rest of the deck is on synergizing to get those cards out. So, like, speaking of tutors, right? I have 4 copies of Shred Memory in this deck, and a lot of people probably don't know what that card is. So it's from the original Visit to Ravnica. It's a 1 and a black, and it's an instant where it's a remove up to 4 target cards in a single graveyard from the game. Not what I'm aiming for. It has Transmute 1 black, and Transmute is a fun little ability to where you discard it from your hand and you search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost, and then you put that into your hand. So guess what? I can find something that costs 2, and mine costs 2.
Oh, geez. It's similar to what I do with building decks, is latching on to a particular idea. Another example I did with the deck, and it was a 60 card deck, and I'm now retooling it into a commander deck. But it was basically, one day I was going through my cards, and this is my favorite when this happens. When I pull up a card, and I just pick up a card and I look at it, and I go, like, I picked up Liliana's Caress, and it was anytime an opponent, it's an enchantment. Anytime an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting card. And I set it aside. I kind of like that. And then I continued going through my deck, or going through my cards, and I found a card from another set called Painful Quandary, and which is an enchantment that is anytime an opponent casts a spell, they either lose 5 life or discard a card. And so if you have a Liliana's Caress and a Painful Quandary on the board, both, then anytime an opponent casts a spell, they're losing life. They're losing either 2 life or 5 life. It's their choice. And if they are hellbent when they cast the spell, they're losing 5 life. So the whole deck was built around getting those 2 cards on the field. It was not a good deck, like, in terms of, I rarely won with it. That's how I like to build decks, is when I find those synergies, those mechanics, those fun little things. And then what I do is basically, I do a similar thing. It snowballs. And I start with 1 card, and then I just start building on it. And I'll use Moxfield. I've been using Moxfield for the past couple of years, and I really like it. I used to use this other service that I can't even remember what it is. It's an old, like, it's still up and running. It's I just can't remember the name of the thing. I'll look it up later. But I used to use another service. It wasn't as good. Moxfield is better. I will probably try Architect. But then what I start doing is I do a similar thing where I have the BCW 1600 card bin. What I've done is I've turned that into my building deck box, and where essentially I have dividers. I have a whole bunch of dividers in it, and I put the decks in there. And then as I find it, when I come across a card that I'm like, ooh, this would work great in my Liliana Commander deck, I pop it in there into the slot for that. Or my Ultra Hug deck that I'm building. Ooh, they're great for that. Throw it in the slot there. And then when I sit down to actually build and, like, do a focused session of building the deck, then I pull it out, sit down, go through my collection, pull the stuff out, get my wish list ready, that kind of thing. That's how I do it.
You also run into the problem too, as you're going through your collection, pulling cards, you find other ones, and you're like, man, maybe this, and you start having more cards
Yeah.
than less.
Yeah. Though I will say I don't have as much trouble as others do cutting, because
Yeah.
this is something that I learned a long time ago. And this is because my buddy Derby is probably one of the best deck builders I know. And my buddy Eric will take umbrage with that. But Derby is. He really is. He's really good at ideas finding ideas to build on in a deck, and then coming up with the perfect cards to make that happen. And the reason why I bring that up is because he taught me a long time ago. He said, if you need to figure out the thesis of your deck. He was an educator, so he liked to use education type stuff. He said, you need to figure out the thesis of your deck. What is your deck trying to do? And then you need to remove everything from the deck that isn't getting you closer to that goal. And now it can be doing that by like tutor. Like tutor technically isn't helping you, except it's getting you the piece that will help you.
And it depends on if you need it though, too, at the same time. And I fully agree with that mentality though, too, because like it's the same thing like when I built my Galta deck. What you're trying to do, and usually it's 2 themes max.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's like, okay, stompy ramp, right? But there's a little bit of leeway you get, especially if you're going more casual. And that's the big thing here is if you're going more casual, you're allowed to have a pet card or 2, right? Just it needs to function within the realm that is your deck on the battlefield, right? Does it interact with anything, or is it kind of just a dud? And that's the other thing you still have to ask yourself when you're playing your games. And like when you build a deck, you're never done. All right, regardless of releases later and you want to swap out cards, when you're playing it, you have to go, hey, am I happy I drew this, and is it going to help me right now?
Exactly.
Or am I loaded up in my hand and I can't cast anything because everything's a really high CMC, right? So maybe I need to start toning it down a bit and going, a bit quicker, lower to the ground cards.
Yeah, and well, I think, and that's something that, and you touched on it there just a moment ago, where you said, when it's a dead card in your hand, and that's something that if something gets through my filter of does it help my thesis? The other filter, which is probably for me the foolproof filter, which is if I draw the card, and almost every time I draw the card, my first thought is, I wish this was something else. I don't want to play this. Then I know I need to cut it, because if you don't want to play it, then it's not helping you do what you want to do. Your deck has a thesis, and you have a thesis for your deck, but whether or not the deck ends up doing that is a different thing. Like there have been many times where I've built a deck thinking I wanted it to go in a particular direction. But when I sat down and actually played it, it went in a completely different direction. And sometimes it's like, oh, I like where I'm going. This is great. Other times I'm like, I'm not having fun here. And then I have to go back to the drawing board and retool. It's when you actually sit down and you start testing the deck is when you start getting the thing to really cut and hone and make it better.
I guess the notion to end with, like, we all build differently. Well, Nate and I do agree on a lot of things. They tend to be a lot more base level, like the feeling of the deck when you're building it. Like your motive to build your deck, that's yours, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm staring at a deck list I have here called Dingus, right? So it's literally, there's a card called Dingus Egg, and I built a deck around it. Actually, I built 2 decks around it, but that's besides the point. But it's like that's where I love Magic, is I love being able to say, hey, I want to do something with this card. Talked about it the other day with you. Like I played a game with my Carnage deck because I really wanted to make that one card nobody liked work. And guess what? That deck is better without it, right? And that's what's going to happen sometimes, right? Your whole rest of your dinner plate that's out here is what's good, and your main dish is terrible.
Yeah.
But you understand it, and it's the same thing. Like when you play your deck, is this working? Is this where I'm trying to go with it? And there's cards I've bought, and then I'm like, I want to put this in a deck, and then I never pull the trigger on it because it's like I don't feel like this fits that thesis.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And I can think of a few, and that'll happen. Like, it's okay. Those cards will get their time to shine.
Yeah, maybe in a different deck. It may be in that deck when you retool it for another reason,
Yeah, the only advice I can give is look at what other people are doing to figure out other cards that they thought of that synergize. Because
exactly,
if you go into Scryfall or Gatherer and you start typing keywords, you're not going to see everything. There's going to be cards that are super old that you've never heard of that do a weird thing, but it magically works with what you're doing, right? So just delve a little bit. You don't have to copy them. Like the deck I'm playing for this is not my build, right? Because someone did it better, and I'm like, you know what? We're going with it, because if I did that, it wouldn't be as good.
The last thing I'll put out there before we wrap up this is, we mentioned before, you're never really done, especially if it's a deck you like to play. You're never really done building it. You're always adding to it. And the example I'll give is at MagicCon Chicago. I have an Arcades wall deck that I honed and worked on and got it down to where I love playing this deck. I absolutely love it. And I sit down at a table on Saturday night, and I actually wasn't playing my Arcades deck. I lent it to a friend, and he was playing it, my friend Spencer. And one of the people we were playing with, I had just met her that night, and I do apologize, I can't remember her name right now, but she had an Arcades deck. She wasn't playing it, but she had one too. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you playing True Conviction in there?" And I went, "No. What is this True Conviction?" And it basically is a card, and it's actually in the Sorcerer's Spellbook for Gideon, but it is 3 and 3 white for creatures you control have double strike and lifelink. And it's a card I never would have thought of to put into her wall deck. And she said, it's one of my win conditions. If I get it on the field, and then with all the other shenanigans I'm doing with the walls, it just completely turns all of my walls into killing machines. Like, I've one-shotted entire tables multiple times with that card. And I immediately looked it up and went and bought one.
It's making me think of the trash pit on the Star Wars movie that like Luke and them get thrown into, right?
Yeah.
Death by Walls.
Death by Walls. Exactly. Oh, that's okay. That's the name of the Arcades deck, Death by Walls. Okay, so did you have anything to add before we wrap up our deck building?
I mean, the only thing is, like, if you do use a deck building site, comment what it is, what you like and what you don't like about them, which ones you've tried, what your preferences are too. Because if there's other ones out there that like I only started using Architect because everyone was starting to talk about it. I was like, you know what, it works, right? And I'm converting towards it because I'm liking some of the features, but I don't know about everything either. And then tell Nate where he's wrong about sticking with Moxfield. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Let me know. Tell me how wrong I am. I love it. And that about does it for today. You can find DM Dingo on Twitch or on the FDS Discord. You can find me, FDSMTG, here on YouTube, FDSMTG, as well as on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, FDSMTG, basically everywhere. Also on TikTok as well. Thank you so much for listening, and you all have a wonderful day.